And good morning, IDR. We'll be getting started in a few minutes. This is a good time for you to test your microphone if you would like to do so right now.
Hey, Jeff, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Jordan.
Thanks.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, G.
Good, thanks.
And last call, for a microphone check. We're about ready to start.
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Sue Kager, are we ready to go?
Sorry, yes, Jeff, good to go.
Okay. Let us get started. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, where you may be. Welcome to IDR for IETF 112. Before we get ourselves started, we see that Sriram is showing his hand up in the virtual hand queue. Sriram, did you have something to add?
It was by accident.
It's okay, you've proven your microphone works. Okay, so we are working off of the pre-shared slides. Hopefully this will be nice and stable. A few quick administrative points early this morning. The IETF Note Well, this is something that each of you have agreed to as part of participating in IETF. You will see this not only as part of your conference materials, but ideally as part of every one of our slide decks. If you're looking for details about what each of these things mean, here are some links to each of the individual BCPs covering these things. You are bound by them. A specific thing that we are getting a little bit of additional emphasis on as part of this IETF is the IESG has requested that we remind everybody that IETF does have a code of conduct, and specifically it also has an anti-harassment policy. And if you find that for some reason that you are experiencing inappropriate behaviors in IETF, please contact the IETF chair or ideally one of the ombudsmans. In general, the things that we emphasize are what a friend of mine used to call kindergarten skills. We expect us to treat everybody with respect, ideally speak slowly and limit use to slang. We're a very international community and English is a terrible language. Please make sure that you use good logic, dispute arguments with no reason. Use good engineering judgment and ideally look for solutions that are best for the whole of the internet. So, quick status for the working group. Since IETF 111, we've published several RFCs, a couple of them on BGP LS, specifically the segment routing extensions, the extensions specifically for egress peer engineering, and also the extended attribute groups. We also published the optimal route reflection RFC. This is a document that has taken a long time for us to get out, and happy to see it actually hit RFC status. And we also published the FlowSpec guidelines for basically relaxed verification of addresses. This is commonly used at service providers and was a very important thing for us to do. A thing that happened outside of IDR but very relevant to our work is the routing working group published the IETF Yang policy module. This will be heavily used by the BGP Yang module that we're working on. Thank you everyone who actually did that work. It was a very tricky bit of modeling. So specifically adopted recent work, we have draft Lee SRv6. This is work that will be getting done under the umbrella of FlowSpec v2, based on our prior discussions. And draft Aura BGP LS service segments has been adopted as well. Other documents that are of interest is BGP Open Policy has been submitted to ISG for publication and is working through IETF last call stuff. I do see that we have some response back and forth that we need to do with the ADs on this things. 7752, BGP LS is going through BIS, and Ketan has responded to my Shepherd comments. We are at the process of quickly iterating as IETF week is progressing, and hopefully we'll have that resolved by end of week. The SRTE policy module is waiting for a Shepherd write-up, and FlowSpec RPD similarly is finished with the least working group last call. It was waiting on a consensus call on write-up. Kare, I think you had that one. What is the status in RPD? And Kare, we see your microphone lit but no voice.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
I can hear
Hello?
you now.
Oh, super. Having some audio problems at my end. It has finished up the working group last call and it's waiting for the Shepherd item. Right.
Okay, so consensus has been declared then. Thank you. Okay, and the last of the list here is that the BGP Extended Community Registry has finished as working through IETF last call, and I don't think we're seeing much in the way of comments there. And hopefully that will be published very quickly. So we had a couple of interim meetings. On September 27th, we had an interim on FlowSpec v2, and the pattern of that was we discussed the functional contents for the upcoming FlowSpec v2, spent some time discussing the problem space for incremental deployment, and we also got a presentation on the SRv6 that we were talking about in the prior slide. The next set of actions that we'll have there is to complete a first revision of the FlowSpec v2 document and resume discussion of the mailing list. There's also some discussion about doing an interim sometime later. We'll talk about that in a moment. We had scheduled an interim specifically for the BGP classful transport and colorware routing proposals. This got canceled due to conflicts by the document authors, and we're hoping to reschedule that. Auto configuration did have a interim, and we reviewed the auto configuration design team requirements. Robert Rashik did a presentation on auto discovery WAN IXP, and turned out to not be necessarily appropriate for data center context, but it did extend on our work that we know that auto configuration state will pop up in many other contexts as we start pushing it forward as a feature. So it was a good presentation to have. In the layer 2 space, we had a presentation of L3DL proposal by Randy Bush. This is a review of the prior proposal. We also had an updated proposal from Shiva from Juniper for draft Minto. And as a non-auto discovery feature, since we had time during the interim, Aijun did a review of the current form of VPN RF, and Aijun and company would absolutely love to have feedback on the mailing list about their proposal. Our next step for auto configuration is that we are probably at the point of beginning protocol selection discussion, although there's, again, some discussion about perhaps having additional interims to maybe advance the work a little bit further. We currently have an interim scheduled for December 6th and December 13th. I believe Sue has also recently added a possible option for November 30th. These are dates that are all just getting them into the IETF calendaring system. The topics that we're looking to have interim discussions about to try to advance the work out of the IETF meeting cycle, specifically BGP, CT, and CAR. We're definitely in need of working group discussion on these topics since they're going to be important things for the industry. Clearly, we have the existing work for FlowSpec v2 and AutoConf, and this also gives us opportunity to discuss things as part of just simply advancing things outside of IETF meeting cycles. we'll be doing coordination with the document authors to find acceptable dates. We do realize that end of year is a challenging time in terms of people's holiday schedules. So we'll be doing what we can to be most accommodating. A brief status update is on the BHP Yang module. Mahesh did manage to get some advancement of the work since the last IETF. So please take a look at the diff there. Just checking to see if Mahesh was joined. He does not appear to be. The authors are intending to try to actually push for functional completion of the document by year end. This has been tricky work, just simply getting the contents of BGP in there, being a large protocol with a number of extensions, and a lot of need for maintainability of the work. The stuff that's going in the BGP module not only heavily leverages things based on as an example, the routing configuration module and the policy module that's been recently published, but we'll also be providing the fundamentals for things like several of the VPN models to use later on and extend, things like maintenance extended communities. There is an open GitHub on this. Authors do welcome contribution towards working on the issues. And that said, we're just hoping to have this done by end of year. We are going to need help for impartial reviewers because, over the lifetime of the document, everybody that has been asked to help work on it has become a working chair, and we'll need to get other people to take a look at it. A topic worth flagging individually is the BGP multicast work. We're seeing a number of documents crossing a number of working groups that are overlapping, from our perspective at least, BGP and multicast type technologies. These things are crossing between primarily BES and IDR, although some of the work reaches into beer, Spring, and motivated in many cases by work that started in the PIM group. You can see a list of some of the documents on the right-hand side. There is procedural overlap. You did see a recent post from Jeffrey Zhang from Juniper, mentioning why his specific document is targeted towards IDR versus some of the work that's in BES. The BES and IDR chairs are in communication about this, and also with ADs, and trying to figure out how we best motivate review and coordination on the documents. Minimally, we'll be having cross-working group review, and exactly which group ends up adopting a specific piece of work is, the thing that we're figure out as we go along. One of the things that makes this a little bit challenging is that Spring is not chartered to do multicast work, really. So this is, to some extent, pushing some of the work outside of Spring. So that is the chair's content. We are currently still on time. We'll pause just a moment here to see if we have any agenda bashing before we proceed with our first presentation, which will be on SR policy extensions for IFIT. And Joel points out on chat that Spring is not chartered to modify BGP, and many of us are thankful for that. Okay, in that case, let us move on to our first presentation, scheduled for 5 minutes.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me, Jeffrey?
We can hear you.
Okay, good. Yeah, this is a quick update about the BGPSR policy extensions for IP. So next slide. Just a recap on background and motivation. So IFIT refers to data plane on path telemetry techniques, specifically in situ OM and alternate marking are the relevant methodologies we are discussing here. You know that NetM might be informed about candidate path by using BGP. There is the relevant document in IDR, the segment routing T policy document that you also explained that is in publication phase, so it's quite advanced in IETF. And this document simply complement the segment routing T policy draft in order to add the extensions to distribute as a policy carrying IFIT information. This way, data plane path elements can be enabled automatically. Next slide. Yeah, just a few words about the latest changes. We specify the application to control a domain. This is a strong requirement that was also discussed in other working groups like 6man about the data plane documents, such as the alternate marking document and also in C2IM document. And this application is done according to RFC 8799 that for this kind of application, it is suggested, it is recommended to limit the application to control a domain. And we also improved the security consideration sections based on this kind of requirement or this kind of precondition about the limited administrative domain application. So next. Yeah, this is about how the IFIT attributes are encoded in the SR policy. So starting from the segment routing T policy draft, we simply add the IFIT attribute that can be attached at the candidate path level as a sub-TLVs, and we define 5 sub-TLVs for inbound OM, for in situ OM, for alternate marking. Next slide. Yeah, in this slide, you have the list of the sub-TLVs for in situ OM. Of course, they are done according to the relevant in situ OM document that is also progressing in IPPM. Next slide. And this is about the sub-TLVs for alternate marking. This is also done according to the relevant data plane document, such as the one in 6man that is in ISG evaluation. Next slide, I think is the last one. Yeah, so this, as I said, this document simply complements the SR policy operation described in segment routing T policy draft by adding the IFIT attributes. Since the segment routing T policy document got working group consensus and is we're waiting for white draft, so we can also consider to progress with this document as well, since it is strictly related to the other one. So that's all. Welcome question, comment. Thank you.
Okay, we're ending on time and have a time for a couple brief questions, if there's any. Okay, there appear to be no questions. Thank you, Giuseppe. Oh, actually, one moment.
Yeah.
Ka? Sorry, Ka is joining for the next presentation. Again, thank you, Giuseppe.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. This is Zhangka from Huawei. My topic is BGP SR policy extension for template. Next slide, please. As we know, BGP can be used to propagate the SR policy candidate path to the head-end nodes in the network. And the BGP SR policy encoding structure is as follows. In this structure, the basic attributes of the candidate path are defined in this draft. Next slide, please. But in application, the head node routers may need to enable many features on the candidate path. For example, in this scenario, there are 2 candidate passes in this SR policy. one pass is to be used as the primary pass has and with the preference 100. The other pass is to be used as the backup pass and has a preference 200. And the features for the two paths are different. For the primary pass, we need a backup path needed, seamless bidirectional forwarding detector needed, and the BFD minimum transportation interval is 10 milliseconds, and also the traffic statistics is needed. But for the backup path, the BFD minimum transfer interval is 20 milliseconds. So it's the two paths has the different features. Now we can use the template to describe these features. So this is the benefits to use the template. First, some features are only meaningful to controller and head and node. BGP protocol no need to know them. So we use the template can show the information that BGP no need to know. Second, features may change frequently. Template can be used to avoid BGP protocol changes too frequently. And third, different SR policies with the same feature can use the same template, thus can simplify configuration and improve maintainability. Next slide, please. So we can use a template. For example, we can configure two templates on the router, and then we can use the controller to download to deliver the SR policy with different template ID. So template is to be defined as a group of features for SR policy candidate paths. And it can use an identifier which is meaningful to the head and node of SR policy. And also template can be configured with template ID and template contents like this. So then the BGP protocols can carry the template ID in SR policy candidate path attributes. After the head node of SR policy receives the BGP protocol candidate path, it can find the contents of the template using template ID and then set up paths with the features defined in the template. Next slide, please. So in order to fulfill the template, we need some extension for BGP SR policy protocol. First, we need to update the SR policy encoding with update the template ID TLV in it, like this. And the format of the template ID sub TLV is like this. And here the type of the template ID is to be defined, and the length is a fixed value of 6. We also use a flags TLV, but none are defined at this stage. Then it's the value of the template ID. It is a 4 value. Next slide, please. That's all. Welcome questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. We do have people asking questions. Srihari, you have the mic.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Okay. Question. So are you proposing this template ID to be globally coordinated number? How do you coordinate across multiple routers?
Okay, the template ID can be just defined in the device, and the controller can know the template ID using netconf or YARN. Also we can configure a range to be used as the template ID for the controller. The controller can allocate the template ID.
So what if you see a template ID that conflicts? Your document doesn't talk about those scenarios.
Okay, if there is, I think for the template ID is only to be used in the device, and if we can configure a template with a template ID. If the controller downloads the same template ID, maybe the attributes can be override by the controller. The template contents can be override and updated.
I'm not sure whether this is going to be adding value, but I'll let others take over. Thanks, Jeff.
Okay, thank you. We can talk later offline.
So next person for the microphone, we have about 2 minutes left, is Andrew.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, in thinking about this, how you see this working in the case of where policy is being sent via reflectors, etc. Because there are cases where policy is being reflected, provided that you've got correct communities, etc., to ensure that it's accepted. When you introduce this templating, does that not kind of require that the templates are globally synchronized within the reflected domain?
You mean the template? How to get the template ID?
Well, I mean, if I'm reflecting policy and it's got a template ID, then surely the routers that are accepting this all have to have the same ID. Otherwise, things are going to get very messy, which means that your template ID kind of has to be unique and properly configured across the entire domain. Otherwise, the reflection is going to break, surely, unless I'm misunderstanding something.
Okay. I think the template ID and its content may just to be identified in the head end of the SR policy, and no need to be unique in the whole network. It is only used in the head end of the SR policy.
Okay, and just as a time check, we're down to 30 seconds.
Email.
Okay, I'm up, Ben. I was just gonna say something from Cisco. I was just gonna say, with the policy, we already have one level of abstraction, and we've been using templates and management platforms for decades to do variations of a similarity, objects that are similar to the template. I see no advantage at all of pushing this into the protocol. And in fact, I think in this case, the feature is much worse than any possible benefit in terms of the problems that people have been bringing up. And those are just symptoms of this whole thing. This is just a bad idea.
Okay, AC, I'm going to ask that be your comment. Shraddha, we have time for a very brief comment.
Yeah, my comment was very similar to what AC was talking about. So what you could do is you can, on the router, you configure the template, and you can configure another policy to say all SR policies with having red in their name would use a red template and something of that sort, and that solves the problem. I agree with AC that I don't really see the benefit of advertising it in the protocol. Thank you.
Thank you, Shraddha.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Janka. Please check the chat. There's a lot of comments there, and it sounds like we have good topics for email list discussion. Our next presentation.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Our next presentation is going to be B2B
Hello?
extensions. Yao Lu, we can hear you.
Okay.
I'm
Please go
Yaro
ahead.
from ZTE. Okay. And this draft is about BGP extension for SI and PLS entropy label position. Next slide, please. IFC 8662 proposes to use entropy labels for SI and PLS networks. As described in it, determining the best place for ELI and EL label pairs may not be an easy decision. Multiple criteria may be considered, such as the EILD of the nodes along the path, and the MSD of the headed node and the binding seed node, and limitations like segment type. Maximizing number of LSRs that will load balance will also be considered. Next slide. This figure shows an interdomain scenario. The end-to-end path from node A to node E is calculated by a centralized controller. Along this path, load balance is required. The headed node in domain 1 may not be able to get the information of the nodes or seeds in domain 2, for example, the EILD of each node. In this case, it's difficult for the headed node in domain 1 to decide the best place of the entropy labels. Another choice is to perform the computation of the entropy label position along this path by the controller. And after computation, the SI path with the entropy label position information can be learned by the headed node via different mechanisms such as PCP or BGP. And this document proposes extensions for BGP to indicate the entropy label position in the segment list when distributing SI policy candidate paths using BGP. Next slide. An E flag is introduced in the flag field of segment list subtier V to indicate the presence of the ELI EL label pairs which are inserted after this segment. It is applicable to SRM PLS segment types, and whether to insert the entropy label pairs is decided by the ingress node. Next slide. And here are the summary of main updates of the draft. It has been presented in IETF 110, and comments from the mailing list are appreciated from Jeff and Robin. And we add more descriptions and clarifications in the new version based on the comments. The centralized controller would be useful to compute both SR paths and the placement of entropy labels, especially in the interdomain scenario. And this draft follows the considerations for entropy label position in IFC 8662. The values of entropy labels are still calculated by ingress node as specified in IFC 6980 and IFC 8662. Other mechanisms are out of scope, and more text is added about how the controller gets the information needed to calculate the entropy label position, relevating the existing work. Next slide. And we request feedbacks and comments, and would like to ask for considering adopting of this draft. That's all.
We have time for a brief question, if there are any. Okay, I do not see any hands raised in the mic queue. I do suggest you take a look at the comment from Shihari in the chat, asking about how we actually determine this. I believe you are also the next presenter.
Yes. Okay, and this draft is about BGP extensions of SR policy for path protection. Next slide. It is introduced in the SR policy architecture that candidate paths may be used for path protection. And the backup candidate path provides protection only when all the segment lists in the active candidate path are invalid. and scenarios like load balancing may need the segment lists for protection. For example, candidate path 1 is the active candidate path. The flows are load balanced between the segment lists 1 and 2, and CB2 will only take place when both list 1 and list 2 are invalid. And in some scenario, we may want to protect list 1. So after list 1 fails, flows can still be load balanced between list 2 and the backup list of list 1. And the protection relationship between segment lists should be flexible. And there's already a working group document in PCE that proposes extensions to PCP to provide backup segment lists for protection. Based on the above considerations, this document mainly proposes extensions of BGP in order to provide path protection using segment lists when delivering SR policy. Next slide. And this slide shows the BGP extensions for SR policy. If the B flag in the segment list sub-TLV is set, it indicates that the segment list act as a backup path. And list identifier sub-TLV is used to identify the segment list, and it contains an optional sub-TLV, list protection TLV. It carries the protection relationship of segment lists. Next slide. And this draft also proposes extensions of BGP-LS. The TELSP distribution draft describes a mechanism to collect the SR policy information that is locally available in a node and advertise it into BGP-LS updates. It includes candidate path state TLV and segment list TLV. The S flag and B flag are originally defined in candidate path state TLV, and two new flags of similar meanings in segment list TLV are defined in this draft. The S flag indicates the segment list is in administrative shut state, and the B flag indicates the segment list is a backup path when set. Next slide. And this draft has been presented in IDR in IETF 109 and received suggestions from Ketan and John that since this draft is related with SR policy, it's better to progress work first in spring before bringing up protocol mechanism for adoption. And this draft has been presented in spring in IETF 111. Next slide. Considering that we got no objection about the idea from spring and similar mechanism in PC has been adopted, we would like to ask for considering for working group adoption. That's all.
Okay, we do have Ketan in the queue. Ketan, you have the mic.
Cisco. Thanks for this presentation update. I just wanted to clarify on my comment in the previous IDR presentation. The proposal here is to change the semantics of segment list from load balancing ECMP construct to active and backup construct. I believe that's something that should be kind of reviewed and updated in the Spring Working Group before this protocol extension is done. So what you're proposing here is a change to the SR policy architecture, and it's fine to do so, but I would suggest to do that first in Spring.
Are you suggesting that we should first update the SR policy architecture?
Yes, because the semantic there is of load balancing, right? So segment lists are for load balancing. They do not have the active backup construct.
Okay. I think since there are already many draft update adding some attributes and some changes as our policy architecture. We will collect more opinions.
We can discuss on the we can discuss on Spring
sure.
Mailer perhaps. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
And, thank you, Yaldo. We'll make sure to capture that point in the minutes and coordinate with Spring, and use when this work should move forward in BGP. Our next presentation is point-to-multipoint policy. Oman, you have the mic.
Thank you very much. If we can go to the next slide, please. Can you folks hear me? Hello?
We can hear you fine.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I have some audio problems, so if anywhere I drop, my colleague Andrew will take over and finish the presentation. With that said, I just wanted to give a little bit of update with regard to all the drafts that are out there for point-to-multipoint policy. As you can see, there is two mother and father drafts. There is the replication segment, and then there is the point-to-multipoint policy under.
So we do seem to be experiencing those audio problems.
And the next hops on the data path. The point-to-multipoint policy, to make it very short and sweet, are the candidate paths. There can be 2 or more candidate paths, and the candidate path with the highest preference is the active. And then under those candidate paths, we have what we call path instances. And the path instances are really used for global optimization of a candidate path itself. Moving forward, obviously, for services, we need signaling via MPBGP, which the MVPN, EVPN, SR point-to-multipoint policy draft is all about. And also there is a Yang model, and then there is this IDR draft, which uses the BGP point-to-multipoint SRTE policy, if you will, to download the instructions from controller to each one of the routers or nodes to set up the data path from the root all the way to the leaf, which we'll talk about. There is a PCE draft, which accomplishes the same thing through the PCE. There is an adoption call going on, and I think the deadline for that is November 25th. And last but not least, there is the ping draft, which is really because the point-to-multipoint policy is all about the controller and the PCE. The ping draft actually provides some OEM functionality on the data path to make sure that the tree is functional from the root to the leaf. So it is very important. One point I want to put on the table here with regard to the ping, as of now, that ping draft is for MPLS only. And for SRv6, we need to have another draft depending on how the conversation for SRv6 OEM pans out in the spring later on. Next slide, please. So going quickly over, I already talked about some of these concepts of the point-to-multipoint policy. So again, it's very similar to unicast. We are using candidate paths. You can have many candidate paths, with the active candidate path being the one with the highest preference. You can engineer your candidate paths based on the controller and download them as a SRLG separate from each other. You can do all these tricks with each one of the candidate paths. A candidate path in a multicast domain is really identified via a root and a tree ID. And there are multiple ways to build these trees and the candidate paths, if you will. There could be PCC initiated, where you use the MVPN procedures to discover the leaves throughout your network. And somehow the controller needs to start listening to this BGP AD routes going back and forth from the leaf and the root and discover these leaves. And based on that, we can use this SRTE, point-to-multipoint SRTE draft to download the instructions to the router. With the same token, you can go on the controller itself and program the tree manually from the root to the leaves, and then the instruction will be downloaded via this draft. Next slide, please. So here's a visualization of what I just talked about. Sometimes a picture speaks 1,000 words. So again, at the root, you have the candidate paths. As I said, you can have multiple candidate paths. The one thing I want to stress here is the instance IDs or the instance paths. Basically, the instance paths are the LSPs, the point-to-multipoint LSPs itself. As I mentioned, each candidate path can have at least two instance paths. And the reason for that is because we want to have a global optimization. So if for whatever reason the controller decides that it wants to optimize a candidate path, it downloads a second point-to-multipoint LSP via the instance path number 2, and then we do MBB procedures from one instance path to another instance path on the candidate path itself. And then you have the replication seeds, which are the replication points. And obviously, these replication seeds can be steered via unicast SR policy, and they can be connected via unicast segment routing throughout the network. So it's a very powerful concept. You only do the replication at the points that you desire. Anywhere else, we can use all the goodies of unicast SR policy that are out there currently, including fast reroutes, ECMP, etc., etc. Next slide, please. So we made some changes with regard to the BGP NLRI and route type. As of now, there is a single NLRI, as you can see in this picture, and there are 3 different route types. So one route type is for the point-to-multipoint policy itself to download the candidate paths. And then we wanted to make sure that this draft is mimicking the unicast policy as a policy very closely. And as such, we changed the route types for the replication segment, which is the instructions to program the data path on each node. So we came up with a route type, which is the binding seek. The binding seek is really the ingress label coming into the node, which identifies the replication segment. And on the egress, we came up with the outgoing interface route type. So that's OIF route. And basically what it is it downloads each single outgoing interface as an individual object, if you will. And doing so, it makes it very much in par with the unicast SR policy draft that is already in the IDR. So by downloading each OIF, it's as if like you're downloading a unicast for one of the branch of the trees, and it really becomes in very nicely with what we already have on the unicast side for the SR policy in the IDR. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go too much into this. This is the point-to-multipoint policy for the candidate path itself. As you can see, we download each candidate path individually, and then you have the path instances, which I already explained, that are used for optimization of each candidate path. There is an optional leaf list that's just for debuggability. If it's a control-initiated tree, then you can download this leaf list to the router as well, just so that if you have a show command or if you have a event, the router can actually say that here are my remote leaf lists. That's the only reason that we download those leaf lists. As such, they're optional. Next slide, please. So here's the point-to-multipoint, and I think I made a mistake here. This is not the policy. This is the OIF, the outgoing interface. Again, the point here was we wanted to make this very uniform with the unicast SR policy, and as such, we are downloading it one outgoing interface at a time, rather than downloading the entire replication segment with all the OIFs. Downloading a single OIF at a time will allow us to download a segment list just for that OIF. And we use the same concepts of unicast, which is the ECMP per weight. And we also added the protection in there, which was your previous presenter kind of presented the concept of unicast, the concept of protection for unicast. We do have such a concept for multicast as well. Next slide, please. So obviously, as always, comments are welcome. We would like to beef up the draft, and we have already done the IPR call that was done on the last IETF, and we are asking for adoption again in this IETF to go forward. Thank you.
Okay, we do have time for some questions. We are actually doing very excellent on our scheduling. We have Jeffrey Zhang in the microphone queue. Jeffrey.
Hi, I just want to comment that there are another way to set up the SRP2MP, even using BGP, and that is not listed in that list of the drafts in one of the earlier slides. I just want to point out that there is another option, and that is actually what Jeff was talking about earlier, that there are discussions ongoing on where the work should take place and things like that. So just want to point out that there's another option to do it, to do the same. Thank you.
Okay, Huaymo, you have the microphone.
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can.
Good.
And we are no longer hearing you, Huaymo.
Yeah, can you upload the slides?
You're in for next presentation. Sorry. Just want to make sure if you were having questions on the current presentation or not. Okay, one moment.
Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about the BGP for BATE path. Next page. So this draft is about a BGP to distribute a BATE path to the ingress of the path. So we know BGP has already been extended to distribute different type of point to multi-point multicast passes using PMSI tunnel attributes. For example, RFC 6514 defined a new tunnel type, which is called RSPPTE P2MP tunnel path to distribute TE P2MP multipass to in the BGP. So another example is that RFC 8556 define a new tunnel type for beer. So use this tunnel type to distribute beer path in the BGP. So it's very straightforward and easy to extend the BGP to distribute a BATE path. So we define a new tunnel type for BATE under PMSI tunnel attribute to distribute a BATE path to the ingress of the path. So in addition, we also describe another options, which is define a new tunnel type on the tunnel encapsulation attribute to distribute a tunnel distribute a BATE path to the ingress of the path. So next page. So under PSMI tunnel attribute, which is attribute type 22, so we define a new tunnel type for BATE. So for BATE path, it will contain a path ID and a number of sub-TLVs. The path ID or path identifier consists of subdomain ID, BFR ID of the ingress node, and the tunnel IDs and the path numbers. So these four combined will identify or uniquely identify a BATE path. So the sub-TLV will include a BATE path sub-TLVs. So this sub-TLV will encode the explicit BATE path. In addition, the sub-TLV may contain a BATE path name sub-TLVs, which indicates the name of the BATE path. The next page. So this is similar. So we extend BGP on the tunnel in-cap attribute. So on this attribute, we define new type for BATE path. So this under this type will include a number of sub-TLVs. So sub-TLV will include BATE path sub-TLV, which includes the path, and then the name TLV, which indicates the name of the path, and then the path ID sub-TLVs, which uniquely identify BATE path. So next page. So we describe two options for BGP to distribute the BATE path to ingress of the path. So both options are straightforward. So we would like to ask comments, and also we would like to request adoptions. Thank you.
Okay, we have Jeffrey Zhang at the microphone.
So Huaimo, you talk about the two options here. It's not clear to me whether you are going to use one of the options or are the two options going to be used for different purposes. And another comment is that here you're just talking about the encodings, but exactly how they're going to be used, I assume they will be talked about in another working group, or is it in BES or in BEER?
Yeah, regarding to your first question, so two options. I think we just because this is we just propose two options. I think both options will be equivalent. From my point of view, looks like the first option is preferred. I think in the finally, well, one option will be selected. So that's for regarding the first question. So the second question is about the application of this one. I think in the draft or in the first presentation in the NASA IETF, I think we described how to apply these extensions. Basically, my understanding is to your question is that how do we distribute the path to the ingress? Is that your question? So if that's your question, and then we describe in more details in the draft.
So my comments here is that well, first we should pick which way to go, and then we can adopt it. And I haven't read that draft yet, so I assume that there either this draft or another draft that does talk about the use case, and typically that it will be adopted in a working group that where the use case is for. For example, the PIN-Z tunnel attributes was initially designed for MVPN, and that was in the best working group. And here you are, if you are going with the PIMSI tunnel attributes option, I assume this is going to be used in some applications like MVPN or EVPN, and seems that the best working group would be a better place to adopt.
Yeah, I think regarding the application, and then we can. So this is the multicast tunnels. So you can use it for MVPN, and also it can be used just carry the multicast traffic, right?
So is this
It's not
used
limited to one application or one application scenarios or cases.
Is this used to set
Jeffrey,
up the tunnel?
this is Sue. Just a minute, Jeffrey. Some of your logic is not necessarily necessary for where you're going to place the document. Some of the things have to do with what specifications they modify. So don't worry about the working group. This is going to be reviewed in cases where you're changing the tunnel encapsulation draft and changing multicast functionality. Odds are this would be one of those drafts which would need to be reviewed by both BEST and IDR. Where it starts out, it would have to be reviewed and probably approved by both. So let's not focus on where the draft ends up and let the chairs deal with that as we're trying to deal with the other portions of the multicast. Let's take today's discussion and focus on the questions on the technology. Would that be okay, Jeffrey?
Definitely, yeah, it is okay. But okay. To go back to my earlier question, is this for the setting up a tunnel or to announce how the tunnel is going to be used?
Yeah, this is about a distributed tunnel to the ingress. So just like those, for example, distributed tunnel, as I mentioned, the already extensions there to do the similar work to distribute the tunnel in the BGP, right? This is a straightforward extension.
The reason I'm asking is that when we are using the PIMSI tunnel attribute, that is to announce what kind of tunnel to use. So depending on the use case of your drafts, it will have bearing on which option to go. So
yeah, I think this one for BAT tunnel looks like a straightforward. So we just because as a single component, we build the tunnel, and then we just did distribute tunnel to the ingress. So just like for example, similar for the SR policy. So just they have SR tunnel and then send it to the ingress node of the tunnel, and that's all. This is very simple, straightforward.
Yeah, I guess we can take it offline, but obviously the first thing is that to determine which option to go with.
Yeah, that we can discuss in the mailing list and then just select one options, because this is just a start point, and also as a starting point, and then with a couple of options is okay, and then finally we finalize to one option, right?
Okay, we also have Drew for the microphone queue.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Jeff, my comment was not related to the slide per se, but since we have a little bit time on the agenda, I wanted to discuss maybe to the chairs and the AD. Looking at the agenda today, like, all the 6 presentations that were presented so far have a similar work happening in PC working group as well. And as a PC working group chair, I haven't discussed this with my co-chair yet, but this thought came to my mind. I wanted to discuss what could we do better so that the coordination between these drafts happen a little bit better? Because I've seen, like, there have been cases where things have been missed, flags have been missed, and now we are writing extensions in PC working group to add those flags back and stuff like that. So what can we do so that the work which is common don't miss things out? There is still coordination between them. Should we do a wiki? Should we ask authors to commit that yes, they have reviewed the document in other draft and made sure that things are aligned? So I wanted to check, like, what thoughts, like, maybe you have, or we can discuss this later, but something that I wanted to discuss further. Thank you.
Okay, and before Sue speaks, based on what we have left in the scheduled queue, if it's okay with Sue and Kayer, I'd like to reserve at least 15 minutes for this discussion. I know it's near and dear to Alvaro's heart as well. Sue, please go ahead.
Dhruv, we should get together as chairs, but I've also put a wiki on the part on the IDR wiki for you to tell me which drafts need to be reviewed. So if you look at the IDR wiki, you'll find a place for it.
Right, and adding to Sue's comment, we've had some general discussion, as we mentioned at the beginning of the session, that the BES and IDR chairs are already starting to discuss this. And a significant portion of the work you're seeing in the first portion of the presentations was organized because of exactly these sorts of issues. We want to be able to have good cross-working group coordination for features. We know that technologies are reaching across boundaries considerably more these days, and BGP is a somewhat generic bit of transport plumbing for some of these mechanisms, especially for tunneling, is something that we end up rendezvousing at. I think you're seeing something very similar in PCE, that PCE as a programming mechanism for ingresses has to coordinate as well. So we're looking at the usual combination of a place of where we want to place state, initiated either at the head end, transported around the network and routing protocols, and result in forwarding behaviors. And Alvaro has discussed that we do need some level of a coordination mechanism, but hasn't given us a specific set of requirements at this point.
Good that we are thinking about it, and let's get together and figure out a plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Dhruv. Jeffrey, you have the queue.
Question for Drew. I'm just curious, the PCE working group, is it specifically for the PCEP protocol, or is it for, or does it also include the general PCE, AE, PCC architecture that when PCEP protocol is not used?
No, we are only for extending the PCEP protocol. Our architecture belongs in TEAS.
Can you, the last sentence, the architecture belongs to what?
The PC architecture belongs in TEAS working group, and we do the extension work.
I see.
The protocol extension.
Okay. So when it comes to SRP2MP tunnel setup, there is a PCEP extension, and then to set up the tunnel using the PCEP protocol, and then there are two BGP proposals to set up using BGP. So the presentation that the woman did earlier is specifically about using one way of using BGP to set up the SRP P2MP tunnel. But indeed, when it comes to SRP2MP, there are different ways to set up tunnel, including the PCEP.
Yeah, that's correct.
Needed. Yes.
Yeah, that's correct. We are only handling the PCEP extension part of it. The actual SRP2MP policy, that all belongs in PIM. And they have a document there which is adopted.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Right, and that's exactly the points we were talking about earlier at the beginning of the session. Alvaro, you have the microphone?
Good morning or good afternoon, whatever you are. Yeah, so this keeps happening more and more, and I just posted on the chat that we keep seeing this more. As you guys have already mentioned, that multicast or point-to-multipoint work that's coming up in BESS, IDR, Spring. There's some PCE work as well, PIM, beer, etc. We need to find better ways of doing this, and Martin, John, and I have been talking about this, and we don't have a silver bullet, to be honest, on how to solve the problem or how to make cross working group work better coordinated. It would be really nice if we could find a consistent way so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time something happens or every time something comes up, but so that we have, as not just working group participants, but chairs, the ability or the tools to find that better coordination. So I think one of the things, for example, is what you guys mentioned here about having a wiki with drafts, etc. Of course, we then need to know how to find that wiki, and we need all the authors to know that. We've been talking about, and Jeff mentioned that up in the chat before, about some type of review team to try and coordinate things across working groups. Some of the things that we're seeing is, for example, based on the point-to-multipoint architecture in PIM, there are multiple solutions. My opinion, personal opinion, is that multiple solutions are not necessarily bad, but we need to coordinate them. And if we're going to have multiple solutions, we need to just make sure that they're properly reviewed across multiple places. If not, if we're going to make the decision to not, then we also need to make that decision somehow. So we need to figure out not just where the drafts are going to be potentially adopted and last call and everything else. Obviously, we're doing BGP extensions. IDR is the obvious place to do that. But we would need, of course, review from other places. We need some type of coordination. So we've been talking, as has been mentioned here, to a bunch of the chairs to try and gather ideas and try to figure out what is the best way going forward. This point-to-multipoint thing is the one that is, I guess, at front right now for us, and we'll probably try something. I don't know exactly what yet, and maybe that will become the consistent way. In the meantime, if you have ideas, thoughts, what would work better, what would be easier, not just for the chairs but for the participants in general, to have a way to know that something else is going on. Besides waiting for the chance that it might come up at the routing area open meeting, for example, and find out about other things, please let us know. Talk to me or Martin or John, or all of us at the same time, whatever you want to do, and we'll be happy to listen to that. We're still looking for what is the best way. But yes, we don't have a silver bullet. I just want, as I said, to find a consistent way so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. So thank you.
Okay. Before we move on to Human, Huaymo, you have your audio open where you're wanting to speak.
Yes, I can speak. Yes.
Please go, Huaymo.
Yeah, I'm done. Yeah, I think.
Oh, you just left your mic open. Okay, you're done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Human?
Yeah, so just a comment on that. Until now, what I've been doing, at least for the point-to-multipoint policy, absolutely, I have a slide that I try to update every single working group with regard to where the drafts are, with regard to at least this technology. But the way I was seeing it until now, again, my 2 cents, obviously open for conversations and comments. The way I was seeing it right now is that this piece is exactly like unicast, and it has been working to some extent. That PIM is taking the lead in the multicast technology itself, and when it comes to all these other bits and pieces for downloading the policies, We've been just going to the appropriate working group and explaining the multicast technology with the multicast experts that are already within those groups. And from tracking purposes, we've just been using that first slide. Not ideal, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows how we've been tracking this work, at least for the point to multipoint policy.
And I agree, and just sort of adding in, sort of a high-level discussion, as Alvaro was saying, there's nothing in current IETF process that really governs how we should be doing this sort of thing. So this will be partially making it up as we go along. Certainly, if people have other experience in other standards organizations about how such larger work gets coordinated, we'd be happy to take it. Probably the best thing that we could do is, much like you're talking about, and pick up some level of interested parties that are doing this cross-area work, and to simply make sure that they're all talking to each other, find a common place to write it down. Certainly the wikis are a place that we can do so, but figuring out where is mostly a matter of preference rather than of technology. And past that point, as we get the people talking to each other and get all the stuff coordinated, maybe some sort of organization will produce itself from that. Okay, Sue, you had your hand up. Sue's removed her hand. Okay, thank you for this useful diversion. We'll make sure this gets captured in the minutes, and I'm sure that part of this topic will pop up as part of the routing area general meeting, as Alvaro was saying. Going back to our next presentation, item number 7, Jordan talking about the BGP LS extensions for flood reflectors.
Can you still hear me? There we go. Sorry about that.
We can hear you.
Okay. So first off, thanks for the time to speak today. So while the draft that we're proposing is a pretty simple BGP-LS extension for ISI's flood reflectors, I just wanted to spend a few minutes kind of driving some context behind it. Next slide, please. So the problem we're trying to solve, I think we all know that, flat single area IGPs come with some pitfalls, lots of flooding, every node needs to know it, lots of state, every node has to remember and maintain it, and then, convergence, right? Every node has to do the computation. And this just gets worse as the network scale. But there are some, desirable properties for that, especially with deployments, things like SR. Next slide, please. So just trying to visualize it a little bit, just a, example topology, relatively small, flat, level 2 ISIS network, single flooding domain. But as the network grows and grows, scale becomes more of a concern. So, again, just kind of driving some more specificity to what was mentioned, lots of state, I have to maintain adjacencies, I have to maintain a larger LSDB, lots of flooding to distribute all that link state information, and then convergence, right? More runs, longer run times, and that just gets compounded by the higher resource utilization required for that. And next slide. And what's the solution? ISI's flood reflection, of course. So this is based on existing work in LSR. It's been adopted. But basically, flood reflectors are a little bit like BGP route reflectors in that we choose a cluster ID, we designate one or more flood reflectors, and then we designate one or more flood reflector clients. And next slide. Okay, so let's kind of visualize and put everything together. So we basically split the level 2 into multiple flooding domains, and that basically just means we take level 1 and level 2. And we establish flood reflector adjacencies in level 2. So we have the flood reflectors at the top, flood reflector clients at the bottom, and we use that level 1 in the middle for transit. One way to do this is leaking the L2 routes from tier 1 into level 1, but there's some other methods defined in the drafts. But the overall result is that level 1 and level 2 can now converge independently. Next slide. Just a quick kind of before and after. I just think it helps show, if you consider larger topologies, how this could, how this sort of work is beneficial. Next slide. And just a real quick thing here. Did we actually improve all the scaling considerations? Yeah, definitely. So, if we consider just a simple topology of 6 level 1, level 2 nodes without flood reflection, we would need 15 adjacencies in level 2, but with the flood reflection, 2 flood reflectors at the top, 4 clients at the bottom, we only need 8. And that gets us added redundancy too. Next slide. And while the other factors, vary per implementation, hardware, network size, et cetera, we do know that, less links and adjacencies mean less LSPDUs, less LSPDUs mean less flooding, and therefore less SPF computation. And next slide. And finally, to this point, so thanks for bearing with me. Basically, we were just asking for some BGP-LS TLBs from the node link and prefix and attribute descriptor registry, just so we can kind of convey that information about flood reflection topologies to the controllers. So pretty straightforward there. And last slide. So what's next? So with the existing flood reflection work already being adopted, we are asking for adoption here for this draft. And while the specific definitions of how the TLBs are used are already identified there, we'll do a little bit of supplemental additions to kind of describe how it's used for BGP-LS. And as always, comments are welcome. And that's it.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. We have plenty of time in the queues. Do we have any questions? And while we're waiting for any hands to go up, this is a place where I'll note that we have had discussions with LSR, and it's perfectly fine to have a separate BGP document. We could also have unified BGP LS extensions and LSR documents, and it's non-controversial to have a feature pop up in BGP after it's already been through LSR. We still have no questions, so thank you for the presentation.
No, you're welcome. Thanks.
This moves us to our last presentation, and since we are remarkably on time this session, we have room for further discussion afterwards if that is people's desire. Next presentation is going to be on extensions for link bandwidth extended communities.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. Here we go. My topic is the extension of the linked bandwidth. That's the slide, please. Okay. There are some problems in using BGP link bandwidth. Bandwidth is now encoded in extended community attribute using C2 bits floating point type. Here we have a brief introduction to data type conversion. As shown in the figure, in floating point numbers fraction determines the precision. The size of a number depends on exponent. So when the value you see the 24th part of 2, it may no longer be accurate after converting to floating point format. Next, please. Okay. The implementation of the floating point conversion may cause some problem, and we had the problem earlier. As shown in the figure, establish a BGP peer relationship between router A and router B. Router A configure an export policy for BGP peer. The policy contains set link boundwise 65566 kbps, and router A converts the boundwise to a floating point number and advertises in updates. The boundwise value 65566 kbps is converted to 8194750 bits encoded as 4A1D4C information point formation. On router B, the expected boundwise value converted back from link boundwise extended community in received BGP update should be 65566 kbps. However, in some interoperability tests, some device converted it back as 65560 kbps, differs by 6 from router A. Next slide, please. Okay. Proposal is to use the combination of units and unsigned integer to accurately represent the boundwise value, such as link boundwise EC in BPS unit, and so on. Here we have a simple usage as shown in the figure. Router A configure an X policy for BGP peer. The policy contains set link boundwise 1,500 megabyte bits per second. On router B, the link boundwise value is obtained directly, avoids the problems with the floating point format. Next slide, please. Okay, welcome convenience and discussion. That's all. Thank you.
AC, you have the microphone.
Systems. I've never really liked the floating point, but I'm wondering if changing it now, I know it was the integrated services guys who decided it would be a good idea to put floating point in an RSVP, and we've been stuck with it ever since. But I'm wondering if it'd be a good idea now to change it. We've had it for decades, and this looks really good for like link bandwidth. But once you start using it for, other things like unreserved or reserved or whatever, the units, you're gonna need fractions. Even if you have 400 gig to start, the pieces of it are going to be different units, and handling all these units, I think it could get unwieldy. I don't like I said, I haven't thought about it too much, and I don't really like the floating point, but I don't know if now is the time to change it.
So I would actually like to add to and add additional things for what AC has just said. Floating point as a representation has been problematic for a lot of reasons. I think my favorite one is that we'll often get people writing naive implementations for simple software-based controllers, and they'll stick in something that is basically a decimal value. So they keep on trying to use it as something that is not floating point. Second problem that I agree with that AC's brought up, the floating points that we're using are low precision floating points. And as a consequence, sometimes you just simply can't get a value that correctly represents what you're trying to do. And it makes comparisons of things in elements like policy very difficult to use. So there's a lot of bad things about our current format. But the thing I do want to add in is that really two details. The first one is that in your presentation, you're giving many different types that overlap in terms of behaviors. Get the correct slide here. So as an example, as Shihari is pointing out in chat, part of the question is, are these powers of 10 or these closer to standard computer-based powers, 1024 rather than 1000 as example. But on top of that, we also have the detail that if you happen to have two BGP communities that have overlapping semantics, just because the units can shift around, the generic community code in most implementations don't know what to do with that. And on top of all that, there's a class of extended community behaviors that are effectively singletons. You're expected to have one link bandwidth attached to your community as an example, and this sort of muddles the semantics. So I think there's good discussion to be had here in terms of, can we do better for something like link bandwidth? We have to figure out how to answer that question as well. AC, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just one more comment. One thing I've thought many times, and this reminded me of it, is I think if we're going to switch to something, it would be good to switch it across all the places, at least in the routing area where link bandwidth is encoded in protocols. And what I would use if I had the power to just have a flag day, I would use a 64-bit number that was just bits per second, rather than having all these different units. I think that this is not something that people are going to want to. This isn't something that programmers are going to like. Let me put it that way. To have all the different the expression of all these different units.
Luca Andre?
To add that this actually came up in BESS with when we considered reusing this extended community, and we ran into very quickly the issue of specifying 1 gigabit per second, or unit gigabit 1, and then unit megabit 1000. And so in the BESS equivalent of this, we actually just normalized to 1 unit. I think it was megabit per second, if I'm not mistaken. So the overlap can actually be problematic, right? So if the byte value is the same, or the byte per second value is the same, but can be expressed in 2 different type comma values, then what do you have to define whether that is a match or not a match.
Be a good argument for the 64-bit number of bits per second consistent units.
I think our primary consideration from not moving to 64 bits at this current time is that people were trying to embed these things in extended communities and had limited space to do so. So this perhaps move is a different direction about how do we encode this on the wire.
Okay, we can discuss overland as a mail.
I agree. And as was pointed out about the best comment, we have multiple things that are looking at this. There's a discussion about transitive versus non-transitive as well. So certainly thank you for bringing this draft to IDR. I think it's a good conversation to start. We're seeing this again across more than one working group, and perhaps this can be part of our motivation to do better about link bandwidth.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We currently have 25 minutes left in our time slot. This is the end of our presentation materials. Before I open up in general, Care, Sue, did you want to add anything, set a specific a thing of topic for discussion?
I'm good to go, Jeff. Thanks.
Okay, and Sue seems to be having some difficulties with her microphone. We'll give her one more moment.
I have nothing to add. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. Okay, so that being said, we do have open floor time for general discussion. Is there a topic that people would like to raise to the working group that they would like broader plenary discussion on? Okay, well, it appears that we have been efficient, and given that we have people in many places around the planet that would be happier for a little bit of extra time off, I move that we adjourn. Our next scheduled session is for tomorrow, and it is for, I believe, the third session of the day.
Jeff, one other option, just in case, since Alvaro's here. Did Alvaro want to go with his presentation for Tuesday early? Alvaro, did you want to have a little bit more time for Thursday?
No, we're fine with going. We're doing that on Thursday. And actually, Ying-san is going to do the presentation on Thursday.
Okay, so we'll let it go. I just know sometimes you have a busy schedule. Thank you very much, Alvaro.
I'll be here. Thank you.
Okay, and our time on Thursday is also not fully scheduled, so we should have some freedom for discussion as well. So in that case, thank you everyone for joining us. We'll pick up again tomorrow. Have a good rest of your day for IETF.